all the way through to the traditional white paper. What's interesting here is that not only is volume increasing, but also the urgency to consume that content has accelerated. So that's that middle stat. In our reports, we call this the content consumption gap. And that's the time in between when a user registers for something and ultimately gets around to viewing it, listening to it, or reading it. That number has accelerated by nearly 14%. And so typically that was a little over 33 hours, I believe, and now it's closer to about 28 hours, which is interesting. To me, that demonstrates clear acceleration of intent and kind of the meaning behind why you registered for the content. I would say, lastly, the one nugget to really latch on here is, as it relates to content association to pipeline, we fire an intercept modal on the back end of registration experiences and are trying to identify when buyers have active pain points, the urgency to address those pain points, and the timeline to invest in addressing those pain points. Webinars, by far and away, drive the greatest consolidation of likely purchase. So it's pretty interesting in the sense that when you look at all different types of content formats, what content do you need to create? What content can you repurpose into a different type of format that more closely aligns to a stage in the journey that perhaps you're weak on? And there's a lot of nuggets here, but the report's a massive investment on our time. And the 2022 report's been out, but the 23 report will be out, I believe, by the end of next month. So you're getting a real kind of sneak peek here at some early insights.
I love it. Yeah, I love these things. I especially like the last stat about webinar registrants being more likely to purchase. That's a nice little
really, right?
feather in our cap. But I think that this is really interesting, especially the part about the consumption gap. Because I remember last year we had a similar conversation, but we actually found that the gap had increased. And that people were taking longer to consume that content, and now we find that that gap has decreased. Why do you? So you mentioned that you think that intent plays a role in this. Do you have any other thoughts on why that gap might be decreasing?
Yeah, it's hard to say, but the hunch internally is that due to the current economic climate now versus then from last year, the prior year actually, it really is fundamentally different, right? We're looking at everyone needing to further justify their existence internally, wherever they are at and whatever role they have, not just marketers. And so when you look about doing research to justify expenses, you should theoretically be more disciplined in what you're doing today versus what you possibly were being allowed to do a year, if not years in prior. And so the assumption there is that simply people are paying closer attention to the decisions that they're making because there's quite honestly urgency and their career on the line if they're not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that it's an interesting finding, and I'm curious to kind of dive into that a little bit more over the next year and see, how buyer behaviors are changing too. And then you have obviously, the webinar registrants, and this is a perfect example, which is going to segue into our next topic around thinking about the content that you're creating and what content is associated best with different stages. Obviously that differs for different people, but on average, you can think about content having the right place at the right time for the right people. And so when you think about that webinar, you can think about it not just from a webinar, but for any asset or piece of content, but you turn that single piece of valuable content into this journey of experiences, is what we're calling it. And when it comes to these content consumption trends, like a webinar is a perfect place to think about. I mean, On24, obviously a leader in webinar technology and experiences as well. So we like talking about that too. But when we think about, this journey of experiences, what are the different kinds of strategies that you think about when it comes to repurposing a single asset into many without exhausting your team or boring your audience?
Yeah, the beauty of starting with a webinar, and again, this isn't to plug webinars on On24 directly, although I'm going to go do it, which is that the beauty of starting with video